Hello! In this tutorial, we will review the Skin Painter and how to use vertices to work on our skinning. Here I am in my rigid bind, the first bind of our dual skin process. The rigid bind and the dual skin process allows me to work very quickly because it cuts down on the time that I would otherwise spend manually to smooth out my influences. First, let's talk about the Skin Atelier. As mentioned, this section here is part of the dual skin or just in general skinning process. These three buttons are for dual skin, this one is for removing or unbinding your skin, and this last one is for mirroring. But we review these in a separate video. These tools at the top are the tools that are used for painting weights. And these tools here at the bottom are the tools that are used for working on our vertex editing, also known as skin numeric field editing. Akeytsu allows us to work from painting weights to editing the vertices without slowing down our workflow. We simply just have to select the tools that we want to use. For now though, I will focus on editing my vertices to clean up my rigid. All the features here require me to select vertices, and in order to select vertices, I simply shift, click and drag on any part of the mesh. You can also do shift and click to select one vertex. So shift, click and drag allows me to make new selections. In order to add to that selection, you hold down Control. And in order to remove from that selection, you can hold down Alt. If you use your numeric pad and you click on the plus button, then that will continuously add to your selection. Clicking on or pressing on the negative button removes selection. Using the asterisk or the multiply number pad key allows you to select all of the vertices in that mesh, and selecting the forward slash removes all selected vertices. Now that we have made a selection, you can see that the Skin Atelier is displaying some joints. Here we have this joint, which is holding all of the influence of the selected vertices. And here I have a selected joint. So if I select any other joint, you can see that that joint will display instead. But I want to add those vertices to this arm right here. So this mid-range here is the atelier's influence value of the last selected vertex. So the last selected vertex you can see here is this brighter white one. The display value on the left is the minimum value of the group of selected vertices, and the right value is the maximum values of the selected vertices. So now we can use the weight spinner, which is this here, to add value or to remove values if you want to on the selected joint. You can also change values through this number pad here. So if I wanted to add half a value, the values range from 0 to 1. So half a value or whatever values I want, I could change it here. If you click on this button, you can switch to the smaller values. Or you can also change the values through the middle column here. Because we are in rigid, I will keep the values as 1, either 0 or 1 on my joints. We can also right-click on a joint in the atelier to select partner influences. So if you are in smooth, then if there are more than one joint influence on the selected vertices, then that will select all the other joints. You can also select influenced vertices, which will select all of the vertices that are being influenced by that joint. Or you can attach selected vertices. So if you select vertices and you attach them, then it'll add the one value to it. So now let's go into our smoothing so that I can show you. Cool. So you can see here that because all of my joints are selected, then they all display here in the atelier. And if I had removed some of the influences from here, then all of the influences would be shared with the rest of the joints. But now if we select any other joint, then you can see that I can start adding influence to that joint. So here is my shoulder. If I wanted to add some weight to that, then I could. I could also change it to half a weight and add half or all of it. And you can see here that if I had this other joint selected and I added some weight to it, and then I wanted to lock this and add weight to a separate joint, then I could go ahead and lock that. And now adding weight to a separate joint does not change the influence of that shoulder locked joint. You can see here that all of the other joints that aren't being displayed in my Skin Atelier are locked here in the picker too. So the locking mechanism allows for us to diminish the risk of letting the weight go to any other joints that we did not want. So for instance, not having any weight from the arm going to any of the leg joints, for instance. And now let's talk about these four buttons up here. We have the copy weights values. We have the paste weight values. So of course you can copy and then paste the values from the selected vertices. So if I select this vertex and copy, then I can select another vertex and paste. And you can see that that will paste the selected weight to that new vertex. Here I have the fix weights tool. So this will fix the weights of the selected vertices to be similar to the ones around it. So if I select these vertices, then not a lot of change is happening because of how smooth it is. But if I make a bigger selection like this, then you can see that some of the same weight from this side is starting to spread over to this side. And now here I have the sweep weights tool, which allows me to remove weight that is too close to 0. So I can change that here in my preferences. Here is the sweep below. I can change that to, let's say, just for an example, I will change this to 0.1. Now if I click that, then you can see that all of those vertices, because they had less than zero point 0.1 influence from this joint, then all of the influence has been removed. Now that I like where my arm is, I can begin working on another part of the character. So let's go back into our rigid bind. So don't forget that our lock skin weights feature in the tree can also be used. So if I'm working on the body and I don't want to work on the skirt or the face, then I can go ahead and lock skin weights on those. We also have to remember that we are only working on half of our mesh, because later on we will be mirroring over our skin and our joints to the other side. So we want to leave the half side wherever those weights fall. We don't want to add them to the root joint because we don't want any weight on the root joint. So we want to decrease the risk of having artifacts when we mirror over our weight. So now concerning the middle of our character, if we start painting weights, since we will be mirroring, I want to make sure that I go over the middle a little bit, like so. That way none of the weights in the center get left behind. And now you can see here that I have already started painting my weights by just clicking on this button. And you can see that the add and remove mode is turned on. So when I left click and drag, then weight is added. But if I want to remove weights, then I use my right button. And again, I want to make sure that when I am removing weights, that I have another joint selected. That way I can begin removing weights to that joint. So if I remove weights from here, then upon selecting this other joint, you can see that that weight is now added to that bone. And so the reason why we want to make sure that we have added or selected more than one joint when we are removing weights is so that the weight does not get distributed to all of the joints. So for the most part, I want to add weights. And to move around, you can use the V key. Okay, now that we have modified our rigid, you can see that the process smooth skin button displays as red, and this is telling us that our rigid is different now from our smooth mesh. And of course, remember to change any settings that you want here. What we can do is we can select any of the joints that we have made changes to, or that we think are close to have been made changes to. So I'm going to select all of these and then press this smooth button again. Joints are being smoothed out. Now that I have gone back and forth cleaning my rigid skin and smoothing it out, it looks a lot better now. During our skinning process, we can always go back into our bind pose and either create new joints, delete joints, translate them around, but you have to make sure to remember that whatever changes you make to your skeleton, you will have to go back into your skin and check and make sure that your skin is working well. So if you add a new joint, you're going to have to add skin to that joint. If you remove a joint, then you'll have to probably make sure that the smoothing of the skinning where that joint was is now up to what you want. One thing we can do here in our bind pose is that we can hide parts of our meshes, and we can select a joint and select all of the vertices where we want the joint to be centered to, and then we click on this button here, center joint, and you can see that that has now put my pivot right in the middle of all of those vertices. Okay, so back to explaining the brush tool. Again, you could add and remove weights with this. This button here is the weight scanner. So when it is turned on, if you hover over any of the vertices, you can see that it'll display the influences that it has. So if you go into smooth, you can see that it displays both of the joints that have influence over this vertice. Now I want to continue smoothing out my mesh a little bit. And since I only changed those vertices there, then I can select the vertices and smooth them out again. But I also want to show you the target mode, which is a target weight value depending on the strength value. So the strength value being here and the weight value being here. Again, you can scroll these down and up to change their values. You can also go into your preferences, and if you do weight step or strength step, then you can see that when you change this little bar, that it'll step or skip by 0.1, and the same for strength step. And you can change the settings here. And this is for the size of your brush. So target mode, so if we go ahead and select all of these vertices that we have changed and smooth them out, now you can see that the changes have been made. And so target mode will add weights to the selected joint based on strength value. So 50. And then here we have smooth mode, which will smooth out the weights. And that has really nothing to do with your values here or your weight value, but it'll more smoothly smooth out the weights on your vertices. And here we have the select deselect mode, and this allows you to select vertices. and you can right click and drag to deselect vertices. Here we have our brush settings, and here we have full paint mode. So this will allow you to paint vertices inside the brush, front, back, far, etc. So since we are here in the select vertices brush mode, you can see that it also selects the back. If we have this off, then you can see it only selects the front. And so this also works for the adding and subtracting and basically any of these other values, tools. Okay, so now I will select all of my joints and smooth it out again. And you can see that that has changed the changes that I had made to my smooth skin. It has returned me to what is the rigid bind smoothing. So the rigid bind, it has been smoothed to this. So we want to make sure that when we are changing our rigid bind, that once we want to work and change on what is already smoothed, that we won't go back to changing the rigid. Otherwise, this will happen and you will have deleted the changes you made to your already smooth skin. So now any smaller details that we want to do, we can go ahead and start doing them. But I feel like I am done here. Of course, that half still needs to be mirrored. So once you feel that you are done with your weights, then you are ready to mirror.